nuisance, I'm a prince and feet away. What a nuisance goes the Corey Curry May. Corey Curry May, and what a nuisance wins the fastest Melbourne Cup.
You're called overseas. How are we judged? How do you judge you guys?
I think the English are acutely aware that the Australians are the best race callers in the world. I don't think the Americans think that. They believe they have the best race callers. But you just have to see, the evidence is there. All of the race callers around the world are Australians.
I think we've got the best. But I do think I think the English and the Americans have got a wonderful style. Yeah. I do enjoy them. It's a slower style with the English, and it's off monitors a fair bit, and they capture the moment. And then the Americans on a good Kentucky Derby or Belmont Stakes or a Preakness or whatever, gee, they can stir you as well. It's very different though, but I've grown up with ours, and I feel like we can safely say that we're as good as anyone in the world. I'm not talking about
and as Matt points out, we've exported a lot of callers, but it's what works in the jurisdictions.
Yeah.
We would not be successful in America if we called like an American caller, I don't believe, and vice versa. I think the British callers have improved immensely.
But even within Australia, certainly when I grew up, so I'm born in 1953, the Queensland, Vince Curry, Keith Nowd, Sydney, Ken Howard, I just got the end of, a lot of Ian Craig, obviously, but more Des Hoysted. And Melbourne were very different to Sydney and Brisbane. It was like two different countries.
Yeah.
Sydney, would you agree, Greg?
Still are, I believe.
Well, you're probably right. Yeah. So there is a distinctive difference, I think, between, I know Matt was in New South Wales for a long time, but I still think a distinctive difference between the Sydney, Queensland calling and the Victorian calling. And I guess I was influenced by the Victorian way.
I was nearly going to say the right way, but that's not true.
Marvellous callers everywhere. I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm saying they're
But there's a style, and
we
were heavily influenced by the likes of Bill Collins, and that was the style. Most of us have a fair bit of Bill in our calling style. Sure. Had we been brought up in country New South Wales, we'd probably have a fair bit of Johnny Tapp or Des Hoysted in the style. It's how you're influenced.
And if we were brought up in America, let's face it, guys, we'd be in some other occupation completely, because I don't think we could have lasted there.
No, probably not.
Is there a race elsewhere in the world that you wish you could have called?
I'd love to have done a derby. And
English derby?
English derby, yeah. And I was actually over there and ready to call one in 85, a slip anchor, 85. And there was a field of 9. It was one of the smallest fields ever in an Epsom derby, and it was all set up. I was going to broadcast it back to the ABC, but at the last minute, the Jockey Club decided to put a premium, a broadcast rights fee, and it was £200. I would have paid it myself, but the ABC said no. So I went and watched the derby and saw Slip Anchor lead all the way and win by 15 lengths or something. It would have been the easiest derby call of all, but I missed out on that one, so I had the opportunity only once. But the guy to your right's called many overseas races.
Grand National, he's got one up on me there, because that would have been the race that, if I had to pick, it and the Japan Cup would be the other one, I think, probably because of the Australian influence with Better Loosen Up and New Zealand influence with Horlicks. But the Aintree Grand National, there's something pretty special about that. I mean, you only have to watch National Velvet once and you're smitten forever.
I'm with Dan. I think Matt's lived the dream, because the Grand National Steeplechase, now it's probably been overshadowed a bit by Cheltenham in the last decade, the Cheltenham Festival in March. But I think the Grand National Steeplechase, if I'd had one other race besides the Melbourne Cup, that would be the dream.
You touched on the Japan Cup, Dan. Brian Martin's call of Better Loosen Up, winning that is one of the best race calls ever. Like, you just nailed it beautifully. Are there other calls similar to that you just love listening to?
Oh, that's a cue for Zima, I think.
Yeah, well, because, I'm 12 years of age. Yeah. And, Zima and Lightfingers, I live in South Australia. And Bart Cummings wins the Cup for the first time, and Cornella's it, and Bill...
Bet you couldn't do the last furlong.
And Bill says...
Could you do the last furlong for us?
I think Midlander and Yanksy were there, but I'm not going to do it. But Bill, I'm tempted.
We're all tempted, Bruce. Come on.
But when Bill said, Bill said, dead heat. So, first love.
Yeah.
So I reckon for all the great calls I've heard over the years, and Greg's responsible for a lot of them, I'm telling you, and Danny and Matt, but Bill. But I reckon I'll go 1965 Melbourne Cup. I'm young, I'm impressionable, I want to be a race caller. I've already written to Bill Collins the year before to say, how do I become a race caller living in Adelaide? And I hear Zima and Lightfingers hit the line together and Bill say, it says dead heat in the Melbourne Cup. I mean, it was a good time to be a South Australian. So 1965 Melbourne Cup, there you go.
There you go. To you, Dan.
Gee, look, I'm not sure. It's not something I reflect on. I don't reflect on it for myself personally. But, you know, the inspiration I got, you've got to remember, my first Melbourne Cup that I called for Channel 10 was the year after his Empire Rose. Now, how on earth can you top that? You know, there are races that send shivers up your spine. I tell you another race that I think I like it for the visuals as much as the audio, but the Red Rum Crisp Grand National at Aintree, I would think that's the greatest horse race that I have ever seen. Now, I was too young to do it, to see it live, but you can view it now. And every now and then I still go back to it and look at it. And that's the top of the tree for a horse race. And it was a jumps race. And obviously the Australian influence there, and that's heavily part of the better loosen up aspect to it. Or even, you know, when Balmerino went over for the Arc, although he didn't win, he ran so well, and Strawberry Road and all those sorts of horses. So to see them on the international stage and perform so well, and when Black Caviar went over, I mean, these are not just, not necessarily the race calls, but they were memorable moments that still sent chills up my spine, made it inspirational for me to want to be there, to try to complement these great horses. Really, it's rare to have a great race or a great race call without a great horse or great horses. That's the recipe, I would think.
You had 36. Amongst that was the first woman to train the winner, the first female jockey, the first horse to win 3. It's pretty hard. Could you pick one out of all those?
Oh, boy. It's like trying to pick your favourite child. I've got 36 of them. I guess the race that keeps cropping up in conversation is always going to be the famous Maccabi Diva three-peat and her third win. And Bruce is largely responsible for me thinking of something to say at that moment, you know, because on the Monday afternoon prior to that Melbourne Cup, I was on a panel and we were ringing around and interviewing many, many guests at the Melbourne Cup, and Bruce was one of them. And in a throwaway line, he just said, oh, I'm sure Greg's got a line prepared for this moment, just as I had for Kathy's Olympic gold. And my heart stopped beating, because the greatest sports broadcaster we've ever had in this country said I've already got a line prepared, and I didn't. I had the worst Monday night before a Melbourne Cup of my life, and I was replaying some old races, and somebody had said, what a legend, and I thought, that'll do. So thank you, Bruce.
There you go.
No, you didn't need me, Greg.
And we're not far from the next edition of the Cup. What advice, if any, could you provide to Matt as he heads into calling his next Cup?
Don't change a thing.
No, he doesn't need advice from us. He's the complete package.
Breathe.
He is.
Breathe. That's what I've got to do.
What do you reckon, Dan?
Well, look, just in case there's a frog in the throat in the morning, just have my phone at the top of the list. But otherwise, we're behind.
Don't bother calling me. I'll be in a champagne tent. You might be in the champagne, Bruce.
I'll be with you, Greg. Hey, Dan, don't hold your breath.
No, not at all. No, not at all.
Talek in front. Clark's got a one, I think. And Talek's a length and a half in front of Rising Fear. Colin Hayes wins his second cup.
But Let's Alight was burst away, and the Foster's Melbourne Cup belongs to the mare. Let's Alight bolts the cup in, wins by 3 lengths, and it's a Cummings Quinella.
But McAvaney Diva clear with 100 metres to go. Excellent runs to second. Origin runs on, but a champion becomes a legend. McAvaney Diva has won it.
Johannes Vermeer, rekindling, wearing it down. Johannes Vermeer and rekindling, stride for stride. Rekindling has won the Emirates Melbourne Cup.